Have you ever wondered how a single moment of rejection could spark a journey of incredible transformation? Imagine standing on a busy street corner, the cold biting at your skin, hunger gnawing at your stomach, and hope barely flickering in your heart. You glance toward a brightly lit store, a place that feels like a haven in the chaos of the city. But as you take a step forward, desperate for a moment's warmth or perhaps a simple act of kindness, you're met not with compassion, but with cold dismissal. This is where a story begins, a story of resilience, redemption, and a man who turned heartbreak into triumph. Kicked out of a store when he was at his lowest, he didn't just survive. He found a way to rewrite his destiny. By the end of this story, you'll not only discover how he returned to the very place he was once rejected, but how he came back as its owner, completely changing its legacy. Stay with us, because as this tale unfolds, it might just remind you that no matter how dark things seem, every setback can be the first step toward an extraordinary comeback. And there's a special message at the end, one that could inspire you to take your own leap toward transformation. It was just another ordinary day for the store's manager, a man too busy balancing his inventory and sales targets to notice the world outside. The doors of the shop swung open every few minutes, ushering in customers with the comforting hum of warmth and the scent of fresh goods. But then came him. He wasn't like the usual customers. His clothes were frayed, his face weathered, and his hesitant steps revealed a man who had battled more storms than most could imagine. As he approached the entrance, he didn't expect much, just a moment of relief from the cold, maybe a chance to feel human again. The manager, however, saw nothing but trouble. "You can't be here," he snapped, his voice loud enough to draw glances from nearby shoppers. The homeless man tried to explain, his voice trembling, but the manager was firm. "We're running a business, not a shelter." Without waiting for another word, he ushered the man out, shutting the door behind him with an air of finality. As he stood outside, his breath visible in the freezing air, the homeless man felt a surge of emotions. Humiliation burned in his chest, anger bubbled under the surface, and somewhere, buried deep, was the faintest glimmer of determination. It wasn't just the rejection that stung, it was the realization that he had been dismissed, not as a person, but as a problem. What the manager didn't know, and what the man himself was yet to discover, was that this moment would become the spark that ignited an extraordinary transformation. As the door slammed shut behind him, the weight of his reality pressed down like never before. He shuffled away from the store, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and his thoughts in turmoil. The city lights blurred in his vision, not from the cold, but from the tears he refused to let fall. He replayed the moment in his mind, each word of dismissal cutting deeper than the last. But it wasn't just the manager's voice he heard, it was a chorus of all the voices that had told him he was worthless. Employers who let him go, friends who abandoned him, strangers who crossed the street to avoid him. Yet, as despair threatened to consume him, another voice emerged. It was softer but insistent, echoing a memory from a time when he still believed in himself. It was his mother's voice, reminding him, "You're more than your circumstances. You can build yourself back up. It starts with one step." That spark of hope didn't erase his pain, but it gave him a sense of resolve. He realized that he was tired of being invisible, tired of being defined by his lowest moments. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to dream, however faintly. He stood on that street corner, gazing back at the store that had just turned him away. One day, he thought, "I'll walk through those doors again. But it won't be like this, it'll be on my terms." The thought was bold, almost absurd, but it was enough to stir something deep within him. That night, he didn't just seek a place to rest, he began to seek a way forward. And though he had no idea how, he made a promise to himself. This would not be the end of his story. Before life unraveled, he had been someone else entirely. Once, he was a man with dreams, plans, and a steady path. He had a job, a modest one, but it paid the bills. He had a tiny apartment where he could call himself the king of his domain. And he had pride, the kind that comes from standing on your own 2 feet. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. His fall from stability didn't happen overnight. It began with a series of small misfortunes, an unexpected layoff that drained his savings, a medical emergency that left him buried in bills, and then the worst blow of all, eviction. He tried everything to hold on, odd jobs, borrowed money, desperate phone calls to people who had long since moved on. But one by one, the threads that held his life together began to fray until there was nothing left to cling to. Soon, The once familiar city became an unforgiving maze, where each day felt like a fight for survival. People saw him on the streets, but they didn't see him. To them, he was just another shadow among many, another statistic in the growing numbers of the homeless. He learned to survive with less, to endure the judgmental stares, to adapt to the harshness of a world that felt colder every day. And yet, despite everything, a part of him clung to the belief that this wasn't permanent. Somewhere deep inside, he carried a fragment of his former self, a man who had dreams, a man who still had something to give. He didn't know when or how, but he vowed to fight his way back, no matter how long it took. The rejection at the store might have seemed like just another blow, but to him, it was the wake-up call he needed. That day, as he walked away with a heavy heart, he decided it was time to stop merely surviving and start reclaiming his life. The road would be long, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it was possible. That night, beneath the overhang of an abandoned building, the man sat with his arms wrapped around his knees. The city was alive with sounds: honking cars, distant laughter, the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on the sidewalk. But none of it reached him. In the stillness of his isolation, he made a decision that would change everything. "I won't let this be my story," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling but resolute. It wasn't a loud declaration or a dramatic moment, but it was the kind of promise that burrows deep, taking root in a weary heart. He didn't know where to begin or how to pull himself out of the pit he'd fallen into, but he knew one thing for certain: giving up was no longer an option. The first step wasn't glamorous, it never is. The next morning, he woke before sunrise and joined a line of men outside a labor agency, hoping for a chance at a day's work. His hands were stiff from the cold, his stomach empty, but he held his place in line. When his turn came, he grabbed the first job offered, no matter how grueling. The work was backbreaking, hauling debris at a construction site for barely enough money to buy a meal, but it was something. That night, when he counted the few crumpled bills in his hand, a strange feeling swept over him: pride. For the first time in months, he felt in control of his fate, however small that control might be. Day after day, he returned to the labor agency, taking whatever work was available. He saved every penny he could, refusing to spend on anything that wasn't essential. Slowly, he began to crawl out of the hole he was in, inch by painful inch. But it wasn't just about earning money. Each day of work reminded him of the person he used to be: a man with strength, determination, and the ability to build something from nothing. With every passing week, his resolve grew stronger. He began to see not just survival, but a glimmer of something more. The memory of that store, of being dismissed so callously, stayed with him, not as a source of bitterness, but as fuel. He imagined walking into that store again one day, not as someone needing help, but as someone who had reclaimed his dignity and proved his worth. That vision became his anchor, guiding him through the hardest days. It was no longer just about surviving, it was about redemption. And deep down, he knew he was only just beginning. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Each morning began the same: rising before dawn, standing in line at the labor agency, and taking whatever work came his way. From unloading trucks to scrubbing floors, he tackled every task with a grit born from necessity. The jobs were exhausting, but they paid enough to keep him going and slowly to save. His evenings, however, were reserved for something else entirely. While others at the shelter would collapse into restless sleep, he would sit under the dim light of a flickering bulb, poring over second-hand books he picked up from street vendors. Subjects like personal finance, business fundamentals, and self-improvement filled his thoughts. He wasn't just working to escape homelessness. He was preparing for something greater. At first, it seemed impossible. The numbers never seemed to add up, and the concepts were foreign to someone who had spent years focused solely on survival. But he kept at it, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, asking questions whenever he could, and slowly piecing together a roadmap for his future. In his quest to improve, he found unexpected allies. A retired teacher who volunteered at the shelter noticed his determination and began offering guidance. A construction supervisor, impressed by his work ethic, gave him extra shifts and even loaned him a battered old laptop. Small gestures of kindness from strangers began to weave a thread of hope through his journey. With each paycheck, he grew more disciplined. A portion went to basic necessities, but the rest, every possible dollar, was tucked away into a savings account he'd opened at a community bank. It wasn't much at first, but watching the balance grow, no matter how slowly, gave him a sense of control he hadn't felt in years. And through it all, he never forgot his ultimate goal, the store. Every time he walked past it, he couldn't help but glance at its bright windows, imagining a day when he wouldn't just walk through its doors, but own the keys to its future. Of course, the road wasn't without setbacks. There were days when work dried up, when unexpected expenses wiped out his savings, and when doubt crept into his mind. But every time he stumbled, he reminded himself of the promise he made on that freezing night, the promise to rewrite his story. Slowly but surely, his efforts began to pay off. The man who had once been invisible now carried himself with quiet confidence. He wasn't there yet, but for the first time in years, he could see the light at the end of the tunnel. His journey had truly begun, and the foundation of his comeback was being laid one small victory at a time. Progress often comes in whispers, not roars, and for him, the whispers were beginning to add up. The first small win came on a chilly morning when his supervisor approached him after a long shift. "You've got something most people don't," the man said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a small bonus. It wasn't much, but to him, it felt like a fortune, a tangible reward for months of relentless effort. That bonus allowed him to make a critical step forward, renting a shared room in a low-cost housing unit. No longer having to sleep in shelters or on the streets gave him a sense of stability he hadn't felt in years. With a safe place to sleep, he could focus more of his energy on planning his next steps. Then came the second victory: steady work. A local warehouse manager, impressed by his dedication, offered him a full-time position. The job wasn't glamorous, but the consistent paycheck allowed him to save faster and worrying less about where his next meal would come from. It also gave him a chance to prove himself in a role that required responsibility and reliability, qualities he had in abundance. With these wins came something he hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. He no longer felt like he was at the mercy of the world around him. Each success, no matter how small, reminded him that he was capable of carving out a new path. But his wins weren't just financial. One day, while organizing deliveries at the warehouse, he struck up a conversation with a coworker who mentioned free workshops at a nearby community center. These workshops, focused on entrepreneurship and financial literacy, became his new obsession. After long shifts, he would rush to attend them, scribbling notes furiously as speakers shared lessons on starting and managing businesses. The knowledge he gained began to shape his vision. It wasn't just about working hard anymore, it was about working smart. He learned about budgeting, networking, and even the basics of negotiating contracts. For the first time, he started to believe that his dream of owning a store wasn't just a far-fetched fantasy, it was achievable. Each of these small victories fueled the fire inside him. They were bricks in the foundation he was building, a life he was reclaiming piece by piece. And as the days turned into months, the man who had once been dismissed as a burden was now becoming an example of perseverance and quiet triumph. What no one realized, not his coworkers, not his neighbors, and perhaps not even himself, was that these small wins were merely the beginning. The big win, the one that would change everything, was just around the corner. With a steady job and a growing sense of purpose, he turned his attention to something he had always undervalued in the past: education. Not the formal kind with classrooms and textbooks. He couldn't afford that, but the kind that came from relentless curiosity and an insatiable drive to learn. Every spare moment became an opportunity to sharpen his knowledge. He scoured libraries for books on entrepreneurship, watched free online tutorials on financial planning, and took detailed notes during the community center workshops. Each nugget of information felt like a key unlocking a door he'd never known existed. One day, during a workshop on business strategy, the facilitator posed a question that stuck with him: "What's your unique value? What can you bring to the market that no one else can?" That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He thought about his struggles, his resilience, and how his experiences had shaped him. Slowly, an idea began to take shape. It wasn't just about owning a store. It was about creating a place where everyone felt welcome, regardless of their circumstances. He wanted to build a business that stood for more than just profit, a business that would be a symbol of second chances. He began attending every networking event he could find, rubbing shoulders with small business owners and entrepreneurs. At first, he felt out of place among people who seemed far ahead of him, but he quickly realized that his story, far from being a disadvantage, was his greatest asset. When he shared his journey, people listened. They saw the fire in his eyes and the sincerity in his voice, and many were willing to offer advice, encouragement, and even mentorship. One such mentor was a retired grocer who had owned a small chain of stores in the area. The grocer took him under his wing, sharing tips on managing inventory, building customer loyalty, and handling the challenges of retail. Running a business is about more than numbers, the old man told him one day. It's about people. If you care about them, they'll care about you. His dream became more detailed with every lesson. He started drafting a rough business plan, complete with budgets, projected expenses, and marketing ideas. He learned about small business loans, startup grants, and other resources available for aspiring entrepreneurs. But he wasn't just preparing for the future, he was applying what he learned in his current job. At the warehouse, he volunteered for inventory management tasks, using them as practice for when he'd one day manage his own store. He studied how his employers handled logistics and operations, picking up insights he would later adapt to his vision. The man who had once been struggling to survive was now evolving into someone who was ready to thrive. Every lesson, every connection, and every step forward brought him closer to his goal. And though the road was still long, he now had the tools and the determination to walk it. Months of hard work, sleepless nights, and relentless learning had culminated in a single document, his business plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the clearest representation of his dream he had ever created. A vision for a store that wasn't just a business, but a sanctuary, a place where everyone, no matter their story, would feel valued and welcome. But vision alone wouldn't make it happen. He needed capital. And that meant taking the biggest risk of all, pitching his dream to potential backers. Armed with his plan and a mix of determination and nervousness, he started reaching out to local banks, small business grant programs, and even community crowdfunding initiatives. The first few attempts were disheartening. He faced rejection after rejection, each one a reminder of how far he still had to go. "It's not feasible," one banker said. "You don't have enough collateral," another remarked. But instead of breaking him, these setbacks strengthened his resolve. For every no, he refined his pitch, researched more thoroughly, and found new ways to present his plan. The turning point came when he applied for a local government grant designed to support small businesses with a social impact. During the interview process, he shared his story with an authenticity that couldn't be ignored. He spoke not just of his vision, but of his journey, how he had clawed his way out of rock bottom, and how this store wasn't just a business idea but a chance to give back to the very community that had once overlooked him. The panel wasn't just impressed, they were inspired. "We believe in your vision," one of the reviewers told him. And with those words, he secured his first major source of funding. But that was only the beginning. With the grant as his foundation, he approached a few of the connections he had made during his journey, people who had been quietly rooting for him. Some offered small loans, others contributed advice or resources. Slowly but surely, the pieces began falling into place. He found a modest storefront in the very neighborhood where his story had taken its lowest turn. It wasn't glamorous, but it was full of potential. With the funds he had raised, he began transforming the space. Friends and acquaintances pitched in, some helping with renovations, others donating supplies. It became a community effort, a labor of love that reflected the spirit of his vision. As he stood in the middle of the half-finished store one evening, surrounded by paint cans and tools, he allowed himself a moment to reflect. This was it. The dream he had carried for so long was finally becoming real. But he wasn't finished yet. The hardest work and the biggest reward was still ahead. The man who had once been rejected at the door of this very neighborhood was now building something that would welcome others. And as he locked up for the night, he couldn't help but smile. The plan was in motion, and nothing could stop him now. The day had finally arrived. After months of tireless work, setbacks, and small victories, his dream was ready to unfold. The grand opening of the store was more than just a business event. It was the culmination of a journey that had started with rejection, loss, and a deep sense of hopelessness. The morning air was crisp, and the street buzzed with excitement as the shop's doors were opened for the first time. A modest sign hung above the entrance, "New Beginnings, a place for everyone." He stood at the door, his heart pounding, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of what he had accomplished. A small crowd had gathered, locals, friends, and even a few curious passers-by. Some recognized him from the past, Others knew him as the new business owner in the area. As people stepped inside, they were greeted with an atmosphere of warmth and inclusion. The store wasn't just selling products, it was offering something deeper, a sense of belonging. Inside, shelves were stocked with essentials, locally made goods, and a few unique items that spoke to the store's purpose. There was a small corner with free resources for people in need, books on job training, community outreach programs, and pamphlets offering support for those struggling, just as he had once struggled. It was a space designed not just to profit, but to uplift. The first few hours were slow, just a few customers trickling in, but that didn't matter to him. Every smile, every kind word, and every item purchased felt like a victory. It wasn't just about the sale, it was about creating a space where people felt seen and heard. Later in the day, the store manager from the very shop that had once kicked him out walked in, clearly surprised to see him behind the counter. The manager didn't recognize him at first, but when he did, his eyes widened in disbelief. The man smiled politely, offering a handshake. "You've done it," the manager said, his voice a mix of admiration and astonishment. The man nodded, offering a small laugh. "I guess I've always had it in me." The opening day ended with a quiet sense of triumph. The store was open, and though the journey wasn't over, this moment marked a profound turning point. It wasn't just about success or achieving a goal, it was about something far more important, proving to himself and to the world that rejection doesn't define you. It's what you do with it that counts. That night, as the last customer left and the lights dimmed, the man stood in the center of the store, soaking in the reality of it all. He had come full circle, from being the person kicked out the door to the one now opening it for others. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was just the beginning. The store was only the start of a bigger story, one of transformation, resilience, and hope. As the weeks went by, the store began to weave itself into the fabric of the community. Word spread, not just about the products on the shelves, but about the story behind the store itself. It wasn't just a place to shop. It had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that change is possible no matter how impossible the odds may seem. Local residents, who had once watched him walk past with his head down, now stopped by to offer their support. Some came out of curiosity, others because they genuinely believed in the mission. Each customer wasn't just a transaction, they were a part of the story. People who had been dismissed, overlooked, or forgotten began to find a place in his store. He made sure to employ individuals who had struggled to find work, people with histories like his own, people who needed a second chance. He was creating opportunities where others saw only risk, and in doing so, he was creating a ripple effect of positive change. One afternoon, an elderly woman who had seen him growing up in the neighborhood walked into the store. She didn't buy anything, but she sat down at the little seating area near the front and chatted with him for over an hour. She talked about the old days, about the community that once looked out for one another, and about how happy she was to see someone taking the initiative to bring that spirit back. "People like you," she said softly, "give us hope. You remind us that it's never too late to change, to start fresh." It was a moment that stuck with him, a reminder of why he had gone through everything he had to get here. This wasn't just his victory, it was the community's victory, too. The store became a hub for local events, from job fairs to free health checkups, from charity drives to educational workshops. His vision had never been solely about running a profitable business, it was about creating a space that contributed to the well-being of the neighborhood, a space where everyone had a chance to thrive. Even the local youth, who had seen too many businesses come and go, began to take interest. Some were eager to learn about entrepreneurship. Others were looking for part-time work. He started offering mentorship programs, teaching young people the value of hard work, responsibility, and the power of a dream. One evening, a young man who had just turned 18 walked into the store, nervous but determined. "I heard you hire people who need a second chance," he said, looking down at his worn shoes. "I don't have much experience, but I'm willing to work hard." The man smiled and extended a hand. "You've got the right attitude. That's all I need to see. Welcome aboard." And so, one by one, the store became not just a place for people to buy things, but a space where lives were transformed, where opportunities were given, and where the community was brought together by a shared belief in possibility. The man who had once been invisible now stood as a symbol of everything they could achieve when they refused to give up. As he looked out the window at the bustling street, He knew that his journey was far from over, but the store, the people it had brought together, and the changes it had sparked were proof that anything was possible. In a world that often feels indifferent, he had found a way to make a real difference, a difference that would echo for generations to come. Months had passed since the grand opening, and business was thriving. The store had become a community cornerstone, a place where people not only came to shop but also to find hope and support. But even as the store prospered, the man continued to look for ways to grow, not just as a business owner but as a person. He believed that success was not just about what you could build, but about how you could give back. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon that the unexpected offer came. The door chimed as a suited man walked in, his polished shoes tapping against the hardwood floor. He was a stranger, but there was something about his demeanor that made the man behind the counter pause. This wasn't the usual customer. The suited man smiled and approached him. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, his voice confident but not arrogant. "And I think what you've built here is impressive. Not just the store, but the way you've transformed this place, this community." The man behind the counter looked at him, curious but cautious. "Thank you. I'm just trying to do what's right." The stranger extended his hand. "My name is Robert Hale. I work for a venture capital firm that specializes in small businesses with a social impact. We've been following your progress, and I think we can help you take this to the next level." The words hung in the air, thick with possibility. The man's heart raced as he processed what he had just heard. A venture capital firm. Could this be real? Was he ready to take on more responsibility, more risk, and potentially lose control of his dream? "I'm not interested in turning this into something I can't control," he said slowly, his voice steady but cautious. "This is more than just a business to me. It's my life, my vision." Robert smiled, clearly expecting the hesitation. "I understand, but that's exactly why I'm here. We don't want to change your vision, we want to help it grow. Our firm specializes in supporting businesses like yours, ones with a strong foundation and a real impact. We can provide resources, connections, and expertise to help you scale, without taking away your autonomy." The man took a deep breath. It wasn't just about money or expansion, it was about maintaining the integrity of what he had worked so hard to build. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't do everything alone forever. He had a growing team, a thriving business, but there was always the possibility of more. "What exactly are you offering?" he asked, his voice guarded. Robert went on to explain. The firm would offer a sizable investment, not as a takeover but as a partnership. They would provide support in areas where he needed it most: logistics, marketing, and even opening more locations. In return, the firm would receive a small percentage of the business, but the man would retain full control over the store and its mission. The offer was tempting, but it wasn't easy. The man spent the next few days thinking it over, weighing the pros and cons. Was this the right move? Or was it a step that would compromise everything he had worked for? He spoke to his mentor, the retired grocer, who offered a simple but powerful piece of advice. "You've built this from the ground up, and you know what's best for it. But don't be afraid to ask for help. The right kind of help can take you places you never imagined." The more he thought about it, the more the offer began to make sense. This was not about giving up control, it was about expanding his vision, about bringing the message of hope and second chances to more people. Finally, after much consideration, he made the decision. He would take the offer, but he would do so on his terms. He would maintain the values that had driven him from the very beginning. And in doing so, he would continue to build not just a business, but a legacy. As he sat down with Robert to discuss the details, he felt a sense of excitement bubbling inside him. This wasn't just about growing his store, it was about expanding his ability to make a difference, to help others in the way that he had been helped. And with this new partnership, the future had never looked brighter. The man who had once been dismissed, overlooked, and rejected was now on the verge of something even greater. The offer was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would take his vision beyond the neighborhood, beyond the store, and into a future where his impact could reach even further. As the partnership with Robert Hale's venture capital firm began to take shape, the man was filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. For all the growth and success he had experienced, he still carried the scars of his past, scars that whispered doubts into his mind. Was he really prepared to expand, to take on more responsibility? Would the soul of his store, the values that had made it so special, be lost in the process? Late at night, after the store had closed, He would sit alone in his office, the weight of the decisions pressing down on him. He had come so far, and now, with the possibility of greater success, there was the looming fear of failure. What if he couldn't handle the pressure? What if the investor's influence shifted his focus from community to profit? The fear of losing control over the very thing he had fought so hard to build was terrifying. It wasn't just fear of failure that plagued him, it was the fear of disappointing the people who had believed in him, the employees who had worked alongside him, the customers who had supported him, the mentors who had guided him. He couldn't shake the thought that by taking on investors, he might be letting them down, compromising the very foundation that had made his store a success. His mentor, the retired grocer, noticed the change in him. One day, after hearing about the growing partnership, the old man stopped by the store and pulled him aside. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," he said gently. "What's going on?" "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," the man confessed, his voice heavy. "This new partnership, it's a huge step, but I'm scared it'll change everything. I've worked so hard to build this. What if I lose control? What if I let people down?" The old man smiled knowingly, a glint of wisdom in his eyes. "Son, the weight of leadership is heavy, but it's the burden of those who have a vision. You've always done what's right for this community. Don't let the fear of change stop you from doing even more. Remember, a business isn't just about control. It's about people. And the people you've helped, the ones who believe in you, are the ones who will ensure your vision stays true, no matter how big you grow." Those words echoed in his mind as he sat in the quiet of his office that night. The fear hadn't gone away, but something shifted within him. He realized that his store, his dream, wasn't built on the foundation of control, it was built on the foundation of trust. Trust in his community, trust in his team, and trust in himself. The doubts didn't disappear overnight, but with each passing day, he grew more confident in his ability to balance growth and integrity. He didn't have to do it all alone. He could still stay true to his vision while seeking help when needed. The key was staying grounded in the core values that had always guided him. The next morning, he walked into the store with a new sense of clarity. His vision hadn't changed. It had only expanded. The future wasn't about avoiding challenges, it was about meeting them head-on, with the same courage and resilience that had brought him this far. And so, with renewed strength, he began the next chapter of his journey, not with fear, but with the confidence that his dream, his store, and his community would continue to grow, evolve, and thrive together. The man who had once doubted himself had found the strength to trust in the process, knowing that the road ahead, though uncertain, was one he was ready to walk. As months turned into years, the store continued to evolve, and so did the man who had once wandered the streets with nothing but a dream. His business had grown beyond what he had ever imagined. New locations were opening in other neighborhoods, all carrying the same spirit of inclusivity and second chances that had been the heart of the first store. But even as he expanded, he remained focused on the core mission that had driven him from the beginning, to offer more than just products, but to offer hope. One afternoon, as he stood at the counter of the original store, watching the familiar faces come and go, he realized just how far he had come. The old doubts and fears that had once clouded his mind had faded into the background, replaced by a quiet confidence. His story wasn't just his own anymore, it had become a part of the community's narrative. The young man who had once walked into the store seeking a second chance was now one of his trusted managers. The elderly woman who had praised him for bringing hope back into the neighborhood had become a regular customer and even a volunteer, organizing events for the local youth. People who had once been struggling now had jobs, support, and opportunities they hadn't had before. His success was not just in the profits, but in the lives he had touched. Looking around, he realized that the impact of his store wasn't just measured in numbers or sales. It was in the stories of redemption and the countless moments when someone was given the chance to change their life. Each person who walked through the doors was a reminder of what was possible when people were given the support and belief they deserved. One evening, as he closed up shop, Robert Hale, the venture capitalist who had helped him grow, paid him a visit. They sat down in the quiet of the store, reflecting on the journey. "You've done it," Robert said, leaning back in his chair. "You've built something remarkable here, but I think there's still more you can do. You've created a business, but now you're building a legacy." The man looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker to life. "A legacy ... I never thought about it that way. I just wanted to make sure no one else felt as lost as I did." Robert smiled, And that's why it's a legacy. Because you've made sure no one will ever feel that way again. The people here, the community you've built, they'll carry this forward long after you're gone. It was a humbling thought. For so long, he had been focused on surviving, on achieving success in a world that seemed to have written him off. But now, as he looked at the thriving business, the people he had helped, and the ripple effect of change he had set in motion, he understood. His story was no longer just about one man, it was about an entire community, united by the belief that everyone deserved a chance. As the years passed, his store became a model for other small businesses with a social mission, and his influence spread to other cities. He started mentoring other entrepreneurs who wanted to make a difference, helping them navigate the challenges he had faced, and teaching them the same principles that had guided him. Never give up, always stay true to your values, and remember that the greatest success lies in the impact you have on others. But the most rewarding part of it all was the simple moments, the community events in the store, the young people getting their first jobs, the mothers finding support, and the people who stopped by just to thank him for offering them a chance when no one else had. Those moments were the true measure of his success. As he sat in the now bustling store one evening, reflecting on how far he had come, he knew that this was just the beginning. His story, and the story of the store, would continue to inspire others for years to come. The man who had once been forgotten by society had built something far greater than just a business. He had built a lasting legacy, one that would change lives for generations to come. Years had passed since that fateful day when he was kicked out of the store, the day that ignited a journey he never could have predicted. Standing now in the middle of his thriving business, surrounded by the familiar hum of customers and the lively chatter of employees, he couldn't help but marvel at the distance he had traveled. He leaned against the counter, his gaze sweeping across the bustling store. The shelves were stocked with more than just products. They were filled with the stories of those who had walked through the doors, seeking something more than just items. They sought opportunity. They sought a second chance. They sought hope. And here, in this place, they had found it. What had started as a dream had grown into a living testament to resilience, not just his own, but of everyone who had been part of this journey. He thought about the moments that had led him here, the countless nights spent figuring out the logistics of running a business, the fears that nearly crippled him at every stage, the doubts that whispered in the quiet hours. There were times when he had wondered if it was all worth it, times when the weight of responsibility felt unbearable. But every challenge, every setback, had only reinforced the values that had driven him from the start. Every person who had been touched by the store, whether it was through employment, mentorship, or simply finding a place to belong, had become a part of something bigger than business. They had become part of a movement, a community that believed in the power of second chances and the possibility of transformation. In those quiet moments of reflection, he remembered the first person who had walked into the store on opening day. It had been a slow start, and he had wondered if anyone would truly embrace the idea. But as time passed, he realized it wasn't just about selling goods, it was about providing a space where people felt valued. It was about creating an environment where everyone, no matter their past, had the chance to move forward. Looking back at all the hurdles, he knew that what had made this business successful wasn't just his own effort, it was the collective effort of the entire community. They had supported him, believed in him, and helped him realize the vision he had once only dreamed about. Without them, none of this would have been possible. A part of him still couldn't quite believe how far he had come. He had once been someone society had overlooked, an individual written off as a lost cause. Yet here he stood, someone who had not only found his footing but had built something that would outlast him. A legacy that would continue to inspire, uplift, and create opportunities for those who felt they had none. And so, as the store buzzed with activity around him, he realized something. His story wasn't just his own. It was a story that could be told 1,000 times over, in neighborhoods across the country, in every place where people dared to dream, where people chose to rebuild their lives. His journey wasn't about the tangible success, the growing business, or the expanding locations. It was about something deeper, the difference he had made, the lives he had touched, and the communities he had helped heal. It was about the simple fact that sometimes, the hardest moments lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. The man who had been kicked out of a store was now the one welcoming others in. The man who had once been invisible to the world had become a beacon of hope for those still struggling. And in that, he had found his true success. As he watched another customer enter, smiling and greeting him by name, he felt a deep sense of peace. This store, this journey, this legacy, he had created something that would endure far beyond the walls of this building. And he couldn't help but smile, knowing that his story, the story of second chances, would live on long after he was gone. It was full circle now, and as he stood there, surrounded by the life he had built, he knew he had achieved what he had set out to do, not just to survive, but to create a future where others could thrive. As the man watched another customer enter, smiling and greeting him by name, a sense of peace washed over him. This store, this journey, this legacy, he had created something that would endure far beyond the walls of this building. And he couldn't help but smile, knowing that his story, the story of second chances, would live on long after he was gone. If you were inspired by this story and believe in the power of second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. Your support helps spread hope and encouragement to others, just like the man in this story did for his community. Thanks for watching, and remember, anything is possible when you believe in yourself and never give up.